Today on The Divide, downtown Seattle is trying to come back to life, but what will it take to convince people to visit?
Let's make the place look clean and beautiful and welcoming as people are coming back.
Also, how Miami's mayor is working to lure tech jobs to his city and what the competition could mean for us.
We view it as a generational tectonic shift and one that we want to capitalize on.
Plus, one of the state's most divisive politicians is in a fight for her job. Who really holds the power in her recall? That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide. Hello and welcome to The Divide. Thank you so much for being with us. One of the most divisive politicians in our state could lose her job. The state Supreme Court deciding this week that a recall can move forward against Seattle's socialist City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. First, for letting protesters into City Hall after hours in the middle of a pandemic. Second, she's accused of using city resources to promote her tax Amazon initiative. And finally, she's accused of leading protesters to the home of Mayor Jenny Durkan, despite the fact that Durkan's address is protected under state law due to threats she received related to her previous post as a United States attorney. Now, Kshama Sawant held a press conference following the court's ruling.
This ruling is completely unjust, but we are not surprised. Working people and oppressed communities know that we cannot rely on the capitalist courts for justice any more than we can on the police.
So I've got a lot to say about this. I'm going to close the show today with some thoughts on the recall and where Sawant is trying to place the blame for the predicament she finds herself in. So stick around for that. But first, I have some other Seattle news I want to get to that impacts really, I think, the whole region as well. As you know, we talked about it on the show. Downtown has not looked very good since the start of the pandemic, especially given, the pandemic combined with the frequent riots and protests throughout 2020. A lot of businesses during that period just opted to board everything up. Here's a video I took back in November. I played it on the show before. I went down, walked a city block. It showed almost every single window on that entire block in the heart of downtown with a board over it. I mean, I was just shocked when I was down there. This is right in the heart of downtown by Westlake Center. But perhaps a few months after this video was taken, there is some hope on the horizon. I went down to that same block yesterday. Look at this. Things look a little better. Some of the boards were removed from those very same windows. Inside the windows, as you see there were big posters encouraging people to dine and shop in the area. There was some art down there as well. Oh, and then I saw this at the end of that block, this display, which I spent quite a bit of time in front of. As you can see, I was quite taken by it. One of them was staring at that pink one right there. I think that pink one wants to be my boyfriend. Look at it. Look at it just looking at me. I had a lot of fun down there. It was much better than looking at a board and graffiti. Hello, friend. Anyway, really off track there. So when we talk about downtown and what has happened there over the past year, as we talked about, some hope on the horizon, perhaps, as more and more people are vaccinated, as restrictions start to lift. The city's business community is certainly hoping that downtown can come back to life. The Downtown Seattle Association releasing this video. I spoke with Jon Scholes, president of the Downtown Seattle Association, about their efforts down there to turn things around. Are you open for business downtown?
We're open for business. Small businesses that have, scratched and clawed to make it through this have reopened their doors. Some of our great attractions like the Pike Place Market and the Space Needle, the Seattle Art Museum, and others are open for business. So there's plenty that is open. There's plenty to do downtown. We're inviting people back. There's lots of work ahead of us and no doubt significant challenges. And we've had many small businesses that haven't made it through this, more than 180 small businesses, mostly restaurants and retailers that have had to permanently close their doors. So we have a lot of work ahead to rebuild and recover and rebuild better. But there's plenty to do, plenty to see. There's still experiences that you can get downtown that you can't get anywhere else. So we welcome folks back.
We also heard this week Amazon releasing a new directive to its employees worldwide, but the little nugget in there that's pertinent to us is in the U.S. it expects to bring its workforce back. And I think for some of these tech companies, we didn't even know if they would want to, but Amazon's saying it's committed to an office-centric environment and that throughout the summer into the fall, most of its workforce will be back there in South Lake Union. How important is that to revitalizing or bringing downtown back to life?
It's a big deal, and it's a big deal for small businesses, for our arts and cultural institutions, for those attractions like the Pike Place Market and their vendors and everybody else who relies on employees downtown as their customer. And what I think Amazon's decision really reflects is that the workforce of the 21st century wants to be in cities. They want to have access to great arts and culture and sports and entertainment, go out to happy hour with their colleagues and friends after work, take in a Mariner game and have great walkability and lots of proximity to all of those things. Now, it doesn't mean that folks won't also desire to have some flexibility and continue to work remote, but we really believe that the workforce of today that really wants to be in those dynamic places where you have access to all of that. And you don't have access to all of that necessarily from your kitchen table or your home office. And so Amazon's decision, I think, really reinforces and reflects that the preferences of the workforce, I don't think fundamentally have changed after, at the point we're at now relative to where we were prior to this pandemic.
So we would be lying to my viewers if we acted as if the economic situations caused by COVID were the only challenges facing downtown. You and I both know that they're not. Homelessness continues to be an incredible crisis, as does the drug crisis, which contributes in a great part to the homeless crisis. There is a charter amendment that's just been, it's just getting off the ground that you guys have a hand in. Talk about what this charter amendment would require of the city as it pertains to homelessness.
Well, we have two public health crises on our hands. One in the form of coronavirus, which we're about to vaccinate away and move on from in many respects. The other is the public health crisis of chronic homelessness and too many people with behavioral health challenges from substance use disorder and mental illness that have nowhere else to go but our parks, sidewalks, and alleys. This is a growing public health crisis, one we came into this pandemic with. The pandemic has just made it worse. We haven't acted fast enough with a greater sense of urgency, and we haven't invested in the right things as a city. So this charter amendment, which was filed this past week, is something that our members, both companies and the nonprofits that serve folks in need in our community, had a lot of input in informing the language. And it will require the city to invest at a level that they have not done so to date, specifically around behavioral health treatment and temporary emergency housing. So we can meet people where they are with the services they need, get more people inside, and then open up our parks and other public spaces. This is a significant effort that should be in front of voters this November, if enough voters sign on petitions this spring. We think it's critical to downtown recovery of our arts and cultural community, small businesses, and the rest of Seattle's neighborhood business districts. We've got to tackle this issue. It's the humane and economic thing to do.
So you got a charter amendment, let's say it passes, gets enough signatures, passes, and then it is supposedly supposed to bind the hands of the council to react to this crisis more aggressively. What if they don't? I mean, what if they just don't do what the charter amendment tells them they're supposed to do? What's the consequence?
Well, the charter is our city's constitution, in effect. So it lays out real clear guidance and requirements for actions of our city government. And one of those actions, should it pass, is that the city must, within 6 months, create 1,000 units of temporary emergency housing and the necessary services to serve the individuals that would be moving into those units. And then within 1 year, 1,000 more temporary housing units and the associated services. So it's time for action. We've declared this a state of emergency, 6 years ago. We've not acted as such. We need to act as if it's an emergency. It is. That it's a public health crisis. It is, and we need to help more people get inside.
And so, and maybe I should know this, maybe this is my lack of knowledge on what happens if city government doesn't abide by a charter amendment, but is there like a legal consequence for them?
There certainly could be. We hope it doesn't come to that. We hope that when voters strongly endorse this, which we expect them to do, that we can come together as a community, move as quickly as possible with a great sense of urgency, just like we've done in fighting this pandemic, and get more people inside so that we can get our economy and our neighborhood small business districts and our downtown going again. We can do this as a community. We've wasted too much time, too much money. There's been too much infighting within our city government. We need to get after this. We need to help people that need help today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can agree with that. You can hear more of my conversation with Jon Scholes about the state of downtown tomorrow on the Divide podcast. We're also going to talk to him about his thoughts on Councilwoman Kshama Sawant's recall. Certainly not a councilwoman that the Downtown Seattle Association has been overly fond of. So please make sure to download and subscribe. All right, coming up, we mentioned Amazon there in that interview, and certainly big tech is key to a thriving economy. But a mayor across the country is hoping to lure some of those techies his way. We'll talk to him. Stick around. Welcome back to The Divide. As some leaders in Seattle do everything they can, it seems, to scare tech companies away. All the way across the country, a mayor is doing everything he can to bring them there. In the city of Miami, Mayor Francis Suarez has been all at Twitter, engaging with tech leaders on social media, hosting then posting these sit-down chats, talking about what makes Miami a good destination for that sector moving forward. His master plan is to convince tech companies to choose his city, which many are starting to do, even if it means leaving other cities. Mayor Suarez and I spoke about his efforts and about what those efforts could mean for our economy here. Mayor Suarez, welcome to The Divide. I don't want you using this interview to take our tech jobs away, okay?
Sorry, I'm going to have to do that.
But in all seriousness, and I do have folks in the tech community in Seattle who are fans of this show, it can't be too hard to pitch techies on sunshine and beaches.
It's not. It's not too hard to pitch them on sunshine and beaches, but it's also not hard when you actually are caring for them, when you actually want them to be in your city, when you don't tax them to death, when you invite them to be here, when you give them concierge services, and you understand that the future of your city is dependent on growing the technology ecosystem that they have been growing for multiple decades. And, you know, a city like Miami didn't have the reputation as a tech giant. And I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, we are the most talked about city in tech in America. And that's because we've been very intentional about it. We obviously had a couple of lightning in a bottle moments and certainly some macro factors that have conspired in our favor. But we're taking advantage of it because we feel like this is a generational opportunity and one that we don't want to let slip away.
So for people who haven't been tracking this started in part over a tweet. I'll read it for folks. It was from December of last year, so just a few months ago. And this guy says, okay, hear me out. What if we move Silicon Valley to Miami? And you retweeted him and just said, how can I help? And that offer of how can I help has sort of become this entity in and of itself. So what are some of the biggest things for you that have come from that one tweet, that one moment?
Wow, there's so many things that if you would have told me on December 3rd, the day before the tweet, that in a few short months I would meet Delian, who's the author of that tweet, that he would bring the Founders Fund, which is one of the largest venture capital funds in Silicon Valley, to Miami and open up an office there, led by Keith Rabois and Peter Thiel, that I would have a direct communication with Elon Musk and talk about boring tunnels under the city of Miami as a means to solve some of our mass transit needs, that Marcelo Claudia from SoftBank would start a $100 million Miami initiative to support Miami-based companies and companies moving to Miami, that Blackstone Tech would move to Miami, that Microsoft would be taking a position in Miami, that JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Colony Capital and Citadel would all be moving to Miami. I would have told you that you couldn't imagine that in your most wildest dreams and fairy tales, but that's exactly what's happened in the last few months. And like I said, we view it as a generational tectonic shift and one that we want to capitalize on. And so when you started the interview saying, please don't take my techies, it's funny, I was doing a clubhouse chat with some mayors, and I won't mention the name of the mayors just to protect their identities. And one of them texted me and said, Mr. Mayor, please stop telling my techies. And the mayor's a dear friend. And I said, you know, I love you, but I'm not going to stop. So that's part of my job.
Well, and I was going to ask you about whether you've had interest from folks or companies or startups that are Seattle-based. You mentioned Microsoft, which is, of course, Redmond, a suburb of Seattle. You know, Seattle's having a tough time right now. I don't know how familiar you are with the climate here, but there is a feeling among the business community that the policies out of City Hall has made this not a friendly place for business. You know, they passed last year a tax on high-paying jobs, which was really kind of meant to be a tax on Amazon. Amazon responded by saying, fine, we're going to ship jobs over to Bellevue, which is, you know, just across the lake. Are you worried about some of the challenges that might come with an influx in tech jobs, things like income inequality, higher rent?
We're not, and I think we're perfectly positioned as a city to grow. We have the ability to grow 10x in terms of our physical landscape, which means that our supply will continue to be available, which will maintain prices low. We have a $100 million Miami Forever initiative to build affordable housing with the private sector. We do public-private partnerships, and we get about a 20-to-1 leverage rate. So we'll build about $2 billion worth of affordable housing with about $100 million in funds. We have another 200 to 300 million potentially coming down the pipeline with extensions of our CRA, which is a community redevelopment agency that's meant to cure slum and blight in cities. It's a statutory vehicle. So we are perfectly positioned to maintain that price advantage that we already have. I mean, we're already 1/3 less expensive than the Bay Area, 1/3 less expensive than New York. So the problem really is for those cities is they continue to have deficits. They continue to try to tax their way out of those deficits. And they also have a cost differential. So it's a really, really hard formula to compete when you consider Miami being a place that is a global city. It has basically direct flights to almost everywhere in the world, with the exception of Asia, and that'll be coming soon. And so, you know, it's just really hard to compete. And frankly, we are in a competitive landscape. And I think sometimes these cities don't realize that the policies that they're implementing are not only hurting themselves, but they're making them less competitive. And there are cities out there that are paying attention, that are doing the exact opposite of what we're doing. Under my leadership, we've reduced taxes to the second lowest level since the 1960s. We've actually increased police funding. So we have the most police officers we've ever had in our history, reduced crime by 25% last year, had the lowest homicide rate the year before since 1954, not adjusted for population growth. And then we focus on quality of life. We've invested in our parks. We have a $100 million investment in a linear park. So we have really focused on what makes a city great. It's a simple formula. It's not something that's complex, and it's not something that can't be imitated. And so as I look to the future, hopefully if I'm reelected in November, which so far everything looks good, I'll be president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors in January. And we're going to try to export that winning formula to the rest of the United States. We don't think it's a Miami secret. We think that it's one that can be replicated and should be replicated across the country.
I was going to say, do you want to come help us in Seattle? Because all those things you mentioned are sort of the antithesis of what's going on here right now.
Listen, my cell phone is always available. All the mayors have it. I talk to them all the time. I'm a nonpartisan elected official. I was elected by 86% when I ran in 2017 for the first time. And I was elected by my peers of mayors across the country to be president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors coming in. So, my accessibility to those mayors is constant and continual, and will always be there if they need to, some advice. But I think for us, it takes sometimes discipline. It takes sometimes making decisions that are tough decisions. And it takes sometimes changing a little bit of the narrative. In Miami, we're traumatized. We're traumatized because our parents, most of them came from communist countries. And so we realized that this model or this idea where the government can just take over everything, let's take over businesses, let's take over private property, let's deny people their fundamental human rights, that doesn't work. And when you continue to tax at higher and higher rates, you're getting closer and closer to a model where government is planning everything. And it just hasn't worked. It pushes the productive people away. And we've seen that from, San Francisco councilwoman who told Elon Musk to F off. And guess what he did? He left. You had officials in New York pushing away Amazon too. And guess what happened? They left. So, I mean, people want to feel welcome. And if you're a job creator, your job is not to solve all of society's bills. Your job is to create a business that employs people, that pays them well, and that creates a product or a service that revolutionizes our world. And that's what the tech industry does. And by the way, newsflash and sort of for everyone, tech is not going away. It's only going to become a bigger and bigger part of our lives. I mean, you can ask my 3-year-old and my 7-year-old, and they can tell you that.
Now, I'm going to let you, because you were so kind to join us, I'm going to let you make your pitch to tech companies who are watching in Seattle. Go ahead, sir.
So my pitch is very simple. If you want to live in a place with incredible weather, with low taxes, that's going to keep you safe, that's going to become eventually the capital of capital. That's what we describe ourselves as. It's a term that I coined, the capital of capital, where you have the most capital coming from areas like Washington State, New York, and California. We already, according to the Wall Street Journal, in Q1, are number 2. Florida is number 2 in the nation in terms of deal flow. If you want to come to a place where you're going to be able to realize your dreams, where government is going to be a facilitator, not a hindrance, and where you're going to live in a premium quality of life, Miami is your place. DM me, direct message me on Twitter, and I will answer you personally, and we'll give you all the concierge services that you need to come over here and start creating the city of the future.
Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. I'll tell you what, that guy is relentless for his city. I can't help but wish that there was more of that in politics in general. And you can catch more of that interview coming up tomorrow on the Divide podcast. All right, coming up after the break to close the show, Kshama Sawant is facing a recall. How she plans to convince voters that there are dark forces at play. Stick around. Seattle's firebrand socialist City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant is in a fight for her job. The state Supreme Court ruling this week that a recall against her can move forward. The accusations are threefold: that she misused taxpayer resources to push her political agenda, that she violated rules by letting protesters into City Hall after hours, and that she led a crowd to Mayor Jenny Durkan's house. The recall means that voters in Sawant's district are now in charge of her political fate, as they should be. They will decide whether she gets to keep her job on the council, no one else. But it didn't take long for Sawant to suggest that there are other forces at play.
Today in Seattle, big business and the right wing are furious about the impact of socialist politics and social movements. They especially hate the inspiring example we have set for working people around the nation after having failed at their attempt to steal the city council election in 2019. Billionaires want a do-over.
Sawant's strategy is no surprise. Try to convince her constituents that the big bad right-wing big business is out to get her and out to get them. It is a strategy Sawant has used before, like during Seattle's occupied protest zone known as CHOP, a deadly experiment in the heart of Sawant's own district, one she actively endorsed. When a young man named Lorenzo Anderson was shot and killed in CHOP, Sawant released a statement blaming the right wing and Donald Trump. Of course, that was not the truth. Anderson was allegedly killed by an 18-year-old acquaintance, this young man here, over a fight they had a year earlier. There was no evidence, there was never any evidence to implicate the right wing, but Sawant said it anyway. A statement designed to deepen divisions and help push her political agenda. And the same is true now. Her campaign calling the current effort to unseat her a billionaire-backed right-wing recall. Well, if that's the case, the billionaires aren't doing a very good job raising money. In fact, the campaign to defend Sawant from the recall has actually raised more. The Sawant Solidarity Campaign raising more than $400,000 so far. The vast majority of that money, 65%, coming from outside the city of Seattle. The average donation, $107. Now let's compare that to the so-called billionaire-backed right-wing recall effort. It has raised far less, just under $300,000. The average donation is also less, just $67, and the biggest portion of that money comes from inside Sawant's district. Those are the facts. But the facts don't play as well for Sawant. It's more convenient to blame billionaires and the right wing, the right wing, a political extreme that hardly exists in Seattle, let alone has an army of willing political donors. If there were such a thing, don't you think they would have stopped Sawant from being elected in the first place? Don't you think they would have a slate of Republicans elected to the city council? Where is this rich right-wing army she thinks wields so much power here in one of the most progressive cities in America? Well, you know as well as I do that no such thing exists. The reality is that Sawant's constituents, the ones who put her in office for another term, get to decide whether she stays there. And if they vote to kick her out, she will have no one to blame but herself. Thank you so much for joining us on The Divide. I'll see you tomorrow on Q13 News This Morning.